Welcome back to Kaleidoscope with Daisy Cousens. I'm here with the phenomenal Liberal Senator Alex Antic. Now, Alex, I mentioned in my introduction that you are not at all afraid to tackle these culture war issues with the left head on. And one of these things you've tackled is the issue of childhood gender transition and radical gender theory. You have a bill, actually, or have had a bill up on it. So tell us about this childhood gender transition prohibition bill of 2023.
Yeah, this was introduced late last year, actually, Daisy, and it's a bill co-sponsored by myself, Senator Ralph Babbitt, Malcolm Roberts and Matt Canavan. So it's really, it's a very broad party base there. You've got a Liberal, a National, UAP and One Nation. So it's a really cross-party bill, but it's emanated out of this office. And look, the rationale for it was the debate we're seeing at the moment with childhood gender transitions and what we do about it. And it's really born of the concept that kids in Australia, in most states, I would say all states, can't drink until they're 18. They can't get a tattoo until they're 18, drive a car until you're 16. And yet there's this sort of somewhat, I would say, strange anomaly whereby kids can take or can be prescribed puberty-blocking cross-sex hormone drugs and then ultimately pretty radical surgery in order to facilitate what they're calling a gender transition. And it struck me that even though these are often state-based issues, there were mechanisms at Commonwealth law to look to put a prohibition on this. And the manner in which this bill tackles it is, if it were to be passed, it's been introduced at the moment, but it's still sitting on the books, hasn't been voted on yet. But if it were to be passed, it would put a prohibition on medical practitioners from prescribing those drugs, performing that surgery, and it would also would defund any of the clinics that are publicly funded on this. And we've seen that, of course, in other jurisdictions already. In fact, just recently, the NHS in the UK removed some of these therapeutics from their equivalent of the PBS. So, it feels like the Western world is drifting away from this sort of narrative, if you like, and Australia is not. We're very much stuck in that vortex. And so the bill is sitting there. It's been debated a couple of times in the preliminary stages with a view to taking it to a hearing and having it debated properly. But that hasn't emerged yet, and it's been knocked back a couple of times in various different forms. So there are people here that don't want to talk about this issue. I do. I think we need to get all the experts in before a Senate inquiry and talk about it, because I think it's a serious issue.
It is a serious issue, and you mention rightly that a lot of European countries and notoriously the UK, which was so into childhood gender transition for a while, there with the Tavistock Clinic and self-ID and everything, they're actually moving away from this. And not only that, the NHS, not only have they taken it off the equivalent of the PBS, they've also said that it's only now to be used in clinical trials, puberty blockers, which I think is effectively admitting that children and teens across the world have been used as lab rats for this kind of experiment in gender. And European countries have come out and said, no, we're not doing this anymore as well. But Australia is still in the space where it's okay. I mean, New South Wales, there's the equality bill being introduced now that would effectively prohibit any kind of counselling of people about gender dysphoria. Yeah, it already passed. I'm going mad, of course, it already passed. So why, Alex, are so many Australian politicians, both left and right, so gutless on this issue?
Yeah, it's hard to know, actually. I mean, I think a bit of it is an awareness of overseas, the mood overseas. If you're watching any sort of media from overseas, you know that the drift is away from this issue at the very least. So I don't think it's as contested space as it is, but obviously some disagree. There are those here that just simply don't even want to talk about it. Labor and the Greens take the line that if we have an inquiry on this important subject, then that will simply just give a platform to radical, hard right, far right, transphobes who all they want to do is harm kids. I mean, it's just nonsense. It's just absolute nonsense. Any other thing other than COVID, we would have a proper inquiry on. These are the two issues that we can't seem to get anyone to talk about, and we can't seem to get inquiries up on. And yet, what does that mean for politics? Well, I think it's a question of getting, the right people into politics as a starting point, but also people have to understand in particular what the likes of the Australian Greens are actually all about. I mean, these are they are really front and centre on blocking some of these inquiries, and these are not friendly environmental parties anymore. Everyone thinks of the Greens when they vote at the ballot box, and they think of, I don't know, the
Save
friendly
the whales,
environmentalist with the straw hat.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. So I think people need to understand that that's not the case anymore. And it's symptomatic of politics. I think politics in many respects has become very risk averse, and these are not radical issues. They are issues that involve the health and safety of children. Mm-hmm. And I just, for the life of me, don't understand why it is that this building will not push it off to a simple inquiry. These are procedural matters. We're not even voting on the bill. We just want to talk about it.
Yeah, it's bizarre, and it is infuriating. And I guess the question I have to ask is, do you think that the politicians that don't want to talk about this are afraid of the radical trans activist lobby?
Well, I think my personal view on this is that I think there's a misconception around political circles about many issues and the general public perception of where they land. I think for a long period of time, both sides of politics have just assumed that everybody's all for net zero and have just sort of almost refused to fight on that battlefront. Certainly I think Labor have made that mistake. I think a lot of their more right-leaning unions wouldn't have a bar of it if they were being honest. And I think that's the case here on this issue too. I think if you took a poll of people on the street, and perhaps we should do it now that I think, you would find that people are very, very worried about this issue. And it's not that contentious at all. I mean, it depends how you brand things. The left of politics are very good at branding things in their own way to make them sound like they are. That's why I get called hard right and far right and the MAGA king, whatever. It's whatever you like, I get called it. And none of it's true, but that's the best way to pick someone off and try and make them wobble. So I think as much of this is about the way in which our side of politics sells its very sensible, very normal politics. And if you make it safe, the others will follow, I'm sure. So that's probably what we need to do.
Yeah, I think you're right. Branding is absolutely everything in activism and politics. The left understands this. They really understand this, and they run with it. But we conservatives have we end up on the back foot a bit. So I think you're right. Branding is very, very important. Now, look, speaking of politicians and Parliament, you addressed the lacklustre nature of Parliament and parliamentarians recently, calling it the least representative building in the land and one in which had been consumed by wokeness. Was it a wake-up call to the politicians, or do Australians need to sort of do more to invest in their politicians?
Yeah, it's probably both. I don't know if anyone's listening when I have a open mic night like that, but it was a 2-minute statement. It just dawned on me as I came back from the Christmas break. You spend Christmas around regular Australia. You're going out to the regions and having a bit of time off and speaking to people in your own circles. And then you come back into this building and you realise how far it's drifted in the last 2 years. It really does feel like the headquarters of Ultimo now. The people that are here, if you're in this building, you're either a woke Labor Green politician, or you've got the ear of one, or you're a lobbyist for one, or you're a media personality covering the events of one. And that's really what it feels like. And so the point I was trying to make was, it's actually quite instructive when you come back in here and you look around the building and you realise immediately how it is that this country has allowed its bureaucracy to balloon, particularly in the area of climate and environment-related bureaucrats. We now see that's exploding. You can see how it is now that we're getting the ute tax. You can see now how it is that we've been, absent at a political level on a whole range of issues that need addressing, including the ones we've been talking about. It all becomes very, very clear when you walk around this building, or if you listen to what comes out of the chamber. I mean, you have to pinch yourself when you come in here and remind yourself that you're not in the real world. It's like opening the doors of Narnia coming into the place. So it's very important that we bring people here that are in touch with everyday Australia and that understand what people are thinking. I mean, it's not hard, and it's not always what politicians think.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are incredibly sick of career politicians, you know, and I think a lot of politicians need to realise that and get back in touch. And speaking of being in touch with the people, you've actually got a sort of rallying cry at the moment there for parents to let you know of any instances of, you know, woke indoctrination materials in schools being propagated to children. The email address people can go to is anticreport, all one word, at protonmail.com. Has there been any response? And if so, what's it been like?
It's been actually overwhelming, Daisy. I mean, I thought it was the purpose of that was just to give parents an opportunity to sort of tell us what's going on. Education is an area that I'm really interested in. You know, with a young boy and another one on the way, you become to start to focus your attention on things that you hurt. Thank you. You start to focus your attention on things that you probably weren't in your world as much in the previous generation, but. They start to focus your attention on what's being taught in schools and the reasons for it, and some of it's eye-watering. I mean, we've heard stories from people of it almost feels quite bizarre. There was one particular instance of almost a social credit type system in a school. Which involved kids getting points depending on whether or not they corrected others for use of their pronouns, whether or not they facilitated a welcome to country speech earlier in the morning before class. You know, my day it used to be who was the traffic monitor, not that I was ever asked to do that for whatever reason. I hadn't carried any baggage, but I wasn't. But now it seems to be a question of whether or not you've literally got a rainbow pin on you. I mean, I don't blame the teachers per se. A lot of teachers we got emails from as well who are equally appalled. I think I feel very sorry for some of them that are trapped in this system. This is an issue of bureaucracy and the manner in which we've allowed the bureaucracy and the national curriculum to overshadow what used to be a locally led thing. So, you could have these school zones being sort of divvied up into good principles and you could pick and choose a bit and there was a bit of variety. That's not the case anymore, and some of these stories are frightening. Many of it's not in the syllabus either. A lot of the stuff that we got told and are being told through that email is that we're seeing programs coming into schools which are pegged as, let's say, for example, training afternoons, for whatever the issue is, and they actually many of them tend to be Trojan horses for leftist issues. So, you can almost outsource the indoctrination to someone else and bring it in and say, well, it's not in the syllabus. So I think the issue is parents being aware of what's going on. Very, very hard. They shouldn't have to. But there's more that needs to be done at federal and state level to fix this. The overriding problem, on top of all of the woke ideology, is that the standards are dropping and we've never tipped more money into schools. We're now somewhere way down the line where countries like Singapore that are more hard and fast with their teaching methods and their standards. In Singapore, you don't go to the next grade if you don't pass. You don't get participation awards in Singapore. You pass or you don't progress. And, that's what we've got to get back to here. But that is a huge job, one we've got to tackle. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a good education is about the greatest opportunity that a person can be given in life is to have a good education. Australia has a responsibility to facilitate it, but the school results speak for themselves and we're simply not doing it at the moment. So, but an absolutely excellent initiative from you. Antic report at Proton Mail. Parents out there, that's the email address to go to in South Australia. Now, speaking of Parliament again and bills, there's quite a terrifying bill in front of Parliament as we speak. And that is the Digital ID Bill. What can you tell us about that? Yeah. Look, Daisy, I've been talking about this one for a while. You've been seeing this on the horizon because we've been seeing it in other countries, and there really is an almost global push towards getting the West and other countries signed up to a system of digital identification, really. And we've seen this come out. This is the language of places like the World Economic Forum, and it's being rolled out in other countries in similar formats. But the Australian version is pretty bad, I have to say. The bill itself is long, complicated, it's confusing, but the overall overarching principle of it is that it seeks to set up a system whereby Australians are offered the opportunity to be part of a digital framework, offered a digital ID, which you can then use for your safety and convenience, by the way, just so you know. You can then use to interact with business and with government. So think of, going to, your MyGov, which of course already has a little bit of this already, or going to the Commonwealth Bank or the ANZ or whatever, rather than have to produce 100 points of ID. You just have your number and, that's it. So it all sounds great because everyone's busy and everyone needs an opportunity to just simply progress in life and not worry about paperwork. But the flip side to this is that we are creating a framework whereby government and this system becomes central to everything you do. Now, the problem with that is framed in what we saw during COVID, in the sense that this gives government the opportunity to turn you on or off, whether you are naughty or nice. So particularly in the example of, let's say, at the moment, it's all voluntary, and we're told it's voluntary. That the stipulations in the bill, the provisions in the bill don't give me any confidence that that would be the case for long. There are mechanisms in there where the minister can make it non-compulsory, or make it compulsory in individual instances. But of course, that means the system is there for amendment. Once the framework's in place, it's not that difficult to amend bills to make it, completely compulsory.
Of course.
So imagine needing to go to hospital and needing to use your Medicare, but not having, having been a holdout for digital ID. Well, perhaps you just don't go to hospital. And we might all laugh at that, but that's basically what we saw during COVID.
Exactly.
There were people that weren't going to hospital, lots of them, because they wouldn't do what the government told them. And this is the framework we're setting up with this bill here. And at the moment, it's before the Senate. It was introduced last year, I think, late last year or early this year. It's before the Senate today as we speak. And it looks like the government are going to ram it through without debate. Because they've got a long agenda, they say. They've got to get through things. Well, this is an enormous piece of legislation, an enormous change for the way we do things in Australia. And the ramifications are huge. Imagine plugging this into a central bank digital currency and plugging it into data from surveillance, plugging it into a whole range of other things. You give yourself a turnkey society potentially whereby people can just be cancelled. And we saw that in Canada with the truckers. And if you want to look into the dystopian future, have a look at what China are doing, where people can be deducted from their bank account for jaywalking because the camera saw them, they have a digital ID and their WeChat bank account just gets deducted without them even doing anything. We're not that far off that. That's the other label, and I'll get called a conspiracy theorist again. But that is where these things potentially lead if we're not careful. I won't support the bill. I have told everyone that wants to listen for a long period of time I won't have a bar of it. We will see what happens today. It's a very strong chance. None of us will get a chance to even talk about it. So
That's outrageous.
This government is absolutely having a lend.
Oh, well, look, thank you for your opposition to it, because it is completely terrifying. It will have some absolutely terrible unintended consequences. And anyone who thinks, that won't happen in Australia, yes, it can, and yes, it will. Look at what we went through with COVID. So an excellent bill to oppose, certainly. Now, look, Alex, just before we go, you actually did something very exciting last year. You were part of a cross-party delegation that went to Washington, D.C. to petition for the release of WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange, an incredible initiative. Tell us how all of that went.
Yeah, look, it was a fascinating trip. It was, I think, one of the only times, certainly in living memory, where as many people, parliamentarians from different parties, had travelled together for the sole purpose. This is one of those issues that I think really does unite the parties. There aren't many of them. This would be one of them, and this was all for the purposes of going to Washington to talk to lawmakers over there about the release of Julian Assange, who in my view should not be being held. And we went with two Green senators, a Labor member of Parliament, Barnaby Joyce, and myself from the other side of Parliament, and independent Monique Ryan from Victoria. And it was a fascinating trip. And I think we did do some really important work. We spoke to Republicans and Democrats and agencies in the United States and really pitched the case. A lot of good things came from it. There were a lot of pressure, I think a lot of pressure put on the DOJ and the Biden administration as a result of that through some of the work of some of the people in the House, great Republican senators like Rand Paul, who we met with, and Thomas Massey, who really do a great job over there. Marjorie Taylor Greene, who gets a bad rap, but she's
very
I tell you what, you want to force what you want a force of nature, it's MTG, and she's been excellent on it too. Look, it was an incredible trip. I think, of course, now we're seeing just last night, I think the decision out of the High Court in the UK, because of course Julian is in prison in the United Kingdom, has been for about 5 years, and the decision was a very strange one in the sense of it was basically a holding position. So he's now the United States government have been asked to provide us assurances that he won't be subject to the death penalty, that he'll be able to engage in free speech, and they've been asked to do that, I think, by the 16th of May or thereabouts. And if it's provided, then he'll go to a one-day hearing, and if not, then the appeal is granted, and sort of he's back in the system. But the whole thing just needs to be brought to an end. He needs to come home.
Oh yeah, he does. It's insane the way he's being disproportionately punished for telling the truth. So I'm very thankful that there are politicians like you and the other cross-party delegates who did that, because it is simply not fair. Senator Alex Antic, this has been a really, really wonderful chat. Thank you so much for coming on. And everyone, please check out the Senator's podcast, Based with Alex Antic. It's on YouTube, it's on Spotify, I believe it's on Apple Podcasts as well. It's a very, very good yarn. All the best today, Senator, in the Senate, and I know you'll be able to get some great work done.
Thank you, Daisy. Thanks again, and congratulations to you on the show as well. It's great stuff.
Oh, you're so kind. Thank you. I can't wait to see you again.
Thanks, Daisy.